Hey friends out there in YouTube land, Robert Ham here with Robert Ham Photography. Today I'm joined by my son. We're actually going to do a portrait tutorial for you here in Red Wing Park. Now you guys know that I like to photograph here quite a bit. Let's just go over a little bit of the lighting that we're going to look at. If you're starting out or an enthusiast photographer or just someone that really wants to take great portraits of your family, you might think going to the park is a nice easy spot to do. But what you'll notice that there are spots like my son's face and our shirts and the sky where things are very, very blown out there, very, very bright, but also spots where things are very, very dark. Just look at the background right now while we're talking. This kind of a mixed lighting environment makes it difficult to get a consistent exposure. So how do you do it? And that's what today's video is about. It's about taking your portraits to the next level here in a real world on location scenario. So let's go ahead and get started. Come on, Robert.
Okay.
All right, let's get this started and share with you a little bit of the gear that we're going to use to make this happen. Now, today I'm going to be using the Sony A7ii, which you see right here. I'm going to pair it with a non-native lens. This is a Canon 51.8, which means I'll be using an adapter as well. I've got a flash on top and a modifier. Let's actually get into what all these things are going to do for us today. First of all, this flash is a pretty normal flash that you find anywhere. This one's about 65 bucks. You get them on B&H. It's a YN560 Series 4. It's got some fun things to it, but today we won't be using it for anything other than just a really great flash. What it's going to do is synchronize with the camera at 1/200th of a second, which is going to be very important. Now a flash, if you don't recall, most of the time have a very small flash head like you can see right in there, and that lets a very small light source very close up, which makes for very hard light. So what this modifier does is it just allows me to use a little bit softer of a light so that I can get just a little bit nicer quality of light. Now, there are many different kinds of flash units that you might want to use. This is just the one that I use, and I'll put that top back on it later. Let's continue talking about the camera. Of course, the camera is a Sony A7 II. It's a nice camera to run out here and do something like this with. It's a mirrorless camera, no mirror box, which means it's got a very short flange distance. That's going to allow me to use non-native glass like this Canon FD with an adapter, and that's really cool. What I'm going to do with this adapter is use the Vizelex adapter, which has a neutral density filter built into it. Now, the nice part about that is that that's going to allow me to set my shutter settings and my aperture for my depth of field and my speed that I want, the motion that I want to show. And then I'll be able to rotate the adapter ring right here in order to engage up to an 8-stop neutral density filter. The reason that's important is that we're out here in this environment where there are many different highlights and shadow tones, and what we want to do is kind of balance them a little bit. But today, this will give you a really great idea of how to take really great portraits with one light on location kind of environment. The final thing that I want to talk about is that this is going to be using this FD 1.8, really nice. I'm going to use it wide open at 1.8. There's some really beautiful characteristics about the lens that I like. It's a nice, bright, kind of low contrasty, very warm lens, which I'm going to enjoy that. But I'm also going to lose all of my autofocus features. So that means that I'm going to be having to focus manually. The way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to actually use the focus peaking feature on the LCD screen or in the viewfinder that allows me to punch in to the eye or whatever I'd like to focus on and then find those high contrast areas. When those high contrast areas are found by the camera, it will light them up with a very bright yellow, and that means that that's going to be nice, sharp focus. It also gives me a visual preview of my depth of field right away because it's a mirrorless camera, so I'll be able to tell how it's going to look. There may be a little bit of sharpening I'll add in post, but for the most part, I want these to be relatively natural, kind of clean, very minimal editing photos so you can see what to expect. Great, now that we're here, this is actually one of my signature shots, and I actually enjoyed doing this portrait backlit with quite a bit of beautiful flash in the front to fill. And the reason's quite simple. When we shoot backlit, we're going to get a lot of specular highlights in the background, which are turned out real nicely. Robert, let's go ahead and get a pan over there so that they can see. Right now, those highlights for you are going to look a little bit hard because of the video, but when we introduce the neutral density filter and the really wide aperture, they're just going to turn into really puffy bubblegum-like round, beautiful bokeh. Continuing this idea, we're going to need to do something in order to make the light more even on both the front and the back. And that's where the neutral density filter comes in. Since we already know that the camera is going to be set at 1/200th of a second, and we're going to be using 1.8 as our aperture and an ISO as low as we can get, whatever your base ISO is, I'm going to then dial in the neutral density filter until the model, in this case my boy Robert, starts to look nice. Now, because we're dealing with such very, very hard backlight from the sun, we're going to need to take the front part of this light sphere off, because we want that harder light to go through, because it's a very small light source and we only have one. Lots of times I would use 3 lights here, but we're going to show you how to do it with just one. And let's get into that now. As you can see, my son's in the background. Wave hi, son. There's a couple of things that we'll talk about right off the bat. We can really zoom in and zoom out in order to get blurry. I'm just adjusting my focus. You'll notice I got the camera set up for these stripy lines. That's going to help me quite a bit. That's zebraing. It just lets me know what's in focus or not in focus. But the camera with this 50mm sees this nice bridge. We got a bridge line. We're going to go ahead and set our camera to our fastest shutter speed, which will be 1/200th of a second right here. We're also going to open our aperture up. Now that we've done that, we've got our neutral density filter. It's already up really pretty high. Let's go ahead and pull it back down so you can kind of see what's taking place. Right here, as we move the neutral density filter, we can go from completely black all the way to opened up, completely blown out. And that's what we're really looking at. So let's go ahead and get that in there. We're going to bring in our histogram. We want to make sure that our histogram's not clipping too much. We're just going to kind of look at this right here. Now, you can actually see how the histogram is moving right now towards the shadows, towards the highlights. This is the histogram right here. So what we want to try to do is get our histogram towards the center. But we've got so much highlights. This is the sky, the little clippy areas up top that you're going to see. So there we go. That's it right there. We're going to punch in as well. And look at that. His eyeglasses are looking really good right now. Okay, now that that's done, we can punch out. As long as he stays there, everything will be fine. Now, I'm going to use my Kelvin white balance right here. It's set for my flash 5600. But also, we want to look at one other thing. There's so much brightness from the sun. There's so much green coming in right here that I'm actually going to change this just a little bit. I'm going to pull it over to the blue side, okay, and I'm going to pull it down to the magenta just a little bit. There we go. I think we can even see that we like that a little bit more, just the way that it looks. The final thing that we want to do is make sure that our flash is going to be enough to give us the light that we want. Let's go ahead and turn that on. I'm going to use this directionally with no cover. I'm going to come up here to 1 full power, and I'm going to zoom it into about 80, which is a little bit tighter than we are. That way it'll make the center of the area that gets hit a little bit brighter than the area around the outside. That's a little trick because we're at a 50mm focal length. Zooming the flash to 80 will give us a little bit of a tighter, brighter spot in the center. I like a vignette, so it adds an in-camera vignette for you there. Of course, the stronger the power, the brighter the vignette, the bigger the effect. But you can do that on your own. And from there, we're going to go ahead and take our first picture, which is on Smile, Robert. 1, 2, and 3. Now, as we look at this image, notice how much is actually blown out from that flash. And I did this way because I wanted to show you. There's lots of times people think that you can't really stop. You can't really, beat the sun with one single flash. And the reality is you absolutely can. Adding a neutral density filter allows you to control the light. Now that we know that, let's dial that down. We're going to go down to about 1/4 power, which is 2 stops from where we were. Let's try it again on 3. 1, 2, and 3. And that's a much nicer image. We got our beautiful reds right here that are coming through. Robert looks nice, and then in the background is looking good. There are still some hot spots in the trees, and because we now know where our flash is doing for us, we can actually pull down just a little bit more on a neutral density filter. We can push up just a little bit on our flash. I'm going to raise it by 1 stop, and we're going to do it again. That's great. We've got that now. Let's check out and see what we've got. Beautiful. We still have the blues in the skies. I think we can even bring in just a little bit more for Robert. I'm going to do 2 things on this. I'm actually going to move my flash in from 1/2 power to full power. I'm going to go ahead and put the Gary Fong Light Sphere dome back on. And finally, I'm actually going to change my zoom. And I'm going to bring it to a 24mm, which is going to be very wide. Now, what I want you to see is at 80mm, look at the amount of the picture that was actually brightened. The edges were not brightened, so we created an in-camera vignette right there using the flash by using the zoom to zoom in tighter than the field of view of our camera. This time we're going to see the opposite. We're actually going to see the sides of the picture become just a little bit more brightened up. So let's take our final photo here and now move to the next spot. Excellent. You can see that extends out quite a bit more. Wave, Robert. What do you think, son?
I think that was a good photo shoot.
I think we had a good time. Today we've been looking at just 2 simple shots using 1 light flash and a neutral density filter in order to really just make some outstanding photos. We haven't even covered all the different shots here in this one small location. I guess there are a couple of tips I think you need to look for. Number one is just get out there and have a good time. Look for interesting situations, take a different vantage, different angle, and look for natural shapes in nature. We like lines, so look for a good location with good lines and good light, and you're going to be right along the way. The number 3 things that we did today that made everything work nicely for us was we used a simple flash to fill the light. Lots of times we chose to shoot backlit, and we chose to outdo the sun with a neutral density filter. We also were able to shoot with our camera's flash sync speed. There was no high-speed sync required here, and all the images that you see have been both straight out of camera as well as lightly edited. So you can see what you'd post to Facebook or something. I hope you had a great time. There is a lot more to do here, so we'll be back in the future with more locations and how to take great pictures out on location. I'm Robert Ham with Robert Ham Photography. This is my son, also Robert Ham.
Robert.
I want to thank you for watching and remind you that we'll catch you on the flip side. All right. Awesome. Nailed it. You ready to play some basketball?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Basketball.
Wave, Robert.